Good afternoon. Thank you for being here. It's good to be back at the State House and see some old friends. You know, before I was in the state legislature, I was a trustee in the Jones County, Bainbridge Township. And in all those campaigns and in my congressional campaign last year, I never had any citizen come up to me and say, you know, the real problem with the legislature is that we just don't keep the same people in office long enough. I never heard anybody say that. In fact, what they would say is, the legislature's out of touch. They don't seem to be in touch with the citizens. And in fact, if you look at the voting patterns in Ohio in recent years, fewer and fewer and fewer people are voting. Even though we keep expanding the ability to vote, fewer people vote. Why is that? Because people feel that their legislators really are living in the political class that doesn't affect them. If we cannot keep at least 8-year term limits in place, we are just reinforcing that view of the legislature. So I am absolutely supportive of this effort to keep term limits, and as Ray said, even tighten up term limits for the state of Ohio. And don't you think maybe we should do something about the folks in Congress as well?
Oh yeah.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Mr. Thompson?
Sure. Thank you. And I've got a few short remarks, shorter than any other time that you hear me speak, so maybe a little bit longer than that. I do want to just explain 1851 Center's position on the term limits issue and why that position is what it is, and also the mechanics of what you in the media can expect to see potentially going forward based upon how the law shakes out and what the options are. So we do support term limits, the caveat being that the term limits we have, we may have written more strictly had I been around. In 1992, I was 12 and busy with something else, so I didn't get a chance to draft these for U.S. term limits. Had I done so, I think I would have probably tried to guard against some of the chicanery with being able to switch from the House to the Senate. We may have considered maybe a lifetime limit, and we're still talking about that. So we may do our own amendment, which I'll get to momentarily. But we do support term limits, and what's interesting for you to know here is these came into effect in 1992. They were not retroactive. So you got 8 years. So 2000 was the first year that these things were ever really in play. And then we've got switching, you know, from the House to the Senate and back and forth. So here we are 8 years after that. And so now the term limits are really coming home to roost, in essence, for the first time, 2008 and again in 2016. And wouldn't you know it, as soon as that happens, we see the same folks who are affected by these limits looking to loosen them, and we worry about incrementalism. So the first proposal appears to be a 12-year proposal, a 4-year expansion, but we're very concerned that 4 years becomes 8 over time, becomes 16, and what happens through incrementalism is these things become disbanded entirely. What we also worry about is special interest and corruption tie-ups, which seem to be more prominent without naming names around the State House here. Maybe later if you press me, but certainly we see an increase in special interest tie-ins, and you all know how that is. You see the legislators rushing off to special events after the House sessions are over, funded by one lobbying group or another. And that creates some alliances other than the alliance to the voter. And finally, the only legitimate method of dethroning incumbents these days with gerrymandering that we have and with some of the campaign finance regulations that we have, it is really term limits. So if we're going to have the government we have today in Ohio, term limits are one of the few ways of accomplishing any sort of meaningful turnover in the legislature. I understand there are some opposing arguments about the expertise of legislators and their experience. And what we really believe is that legislators aren't technocrats. Their philosophy and their backbone and their allegiance, not to special interests, but to their voters, is much more important than that. And then finally, the mechanics of what could happen. Very briefly, the General Assembly has the ability, as you all know, to put issues on the ballot, constitutional amendments on the ballot. They have to do so 90 days at the latest before an election. So that means August, the first week of August, if they are going to put it on the November 2015 ballot. If they wanted to put it on the May 2016 ballot, they could also do that. I should say that I expect them to put it on the May 2016 ballot, but we are also prepared for them to put it on the November 2015 ballot. if they decide to go that route. So we'll know that by the first week of August. So we're prepared to fight that campaign. U.S. term limits took the term limits issue all the way to the Supreme Court in the 90s, and they have a great deal of resources and capacity. And we're at 1851. We firm understanding that they'll do whatever it takes in opposing the issue. But what we can do is scrutinize the ballot language. What we've seen in some other states is that when legislators seek to loosen term limits, they use terms like, oh, this is for good government, this is for the ethics of the legislative branch of government, or they call it maybe even Anti-Corruption Act. So they use all kinds of glossy terms. So we'll be scrutinizing that kind of ballot language before the ballot board, with the Secretary of State, you said, and then to the Ohio Supreme Court if we have to. But what we can also do here, when we have the resources to do, if we need to, is offer an alternative constitutional amendment. This can be a preemptive strike before the legislature places an issue on the ballot. This may be a simultaneous amendment at the same time that the legislature places the amendment on the ballot. Now, if that is the case, whichever measure gets more votes would be the prevailing measure. And we can also do a strike after the legislature places an amendment on the ballot. So their issue may pass, and we could come back to the very next election cycle with stricter term limits. And I want to stress in each of those cases, the term limits will be stricter, or the other alternative is that we alter Article 16 of the Constitution to prevent the legislature from enacting or placing measures on the ballot that either raise their own pay or lengthen their own terms. We simply take that power away from the legislature rather than dealing with term limits directly. So those are the mechanics of what we might be looking at here. I hope that gives you kind of a roadmap to what to be looking for.